Шановні пані,
Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are continuing our working day in UCMC. We are going to talk about trafficking in human beings and new threats to Ukraine. We are going to have Stephen Rogers, Deputy Head of the International Organization for Migration in Ukraine, Inna Volosevych, Head of Social and Political Studies, JFK Ukraine, and Natalia Fedorovych, Director of the Family, Gender Policy and Human Trafficking, the Department, the Minister of Social Policy, Ukraine. You have the floor, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Stephen Rogers, Deputy Head of the International Organization for Migration Ukraine. Today, the world community marks the World Day of combating human trafficking, which was declared by the United Nations in 1994 in order to spread the information, protect the rights of the people. And the IOM works in the sphere of countering the human trafficking in Ukraine since 1998. Starting in 2000, together with some public organizations and public services, we provided assistance to more than 11,000 males, females, and children who suffered from human trafficking for the purpose of the labor and sexual exploitation in more than 60 countries. This year we observed the changing tendency of this sphere. They actually reflect to some extent the situation and the sentiments of Ukrainian society as a result of the poll which we are going to present to you today. Comparatively reduced the share of those who suffered from the exploitation in the Russian Federation from 77% in 13 and 14 years, to 44% over the last this year. And those who suffered in the EU member states increased from 15% last year to 18% in the period in the first half of this year. Out of that number, 8.5% of the people suffered in Poland. So if you're talking about what we can expect, the countries for the human trafficking through Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and for the first time ever in the history of our program, the self-proclaimed Republic of Abkhazia. The share of those who suffered from human trafficking in Ukraine this year is comparatively low, only 3%. At the same time, we fixed individual cases of human trafficking and attempts human trafficking among the internally displaced persons, IDPs. Like in the previous years, the cases of human trafficking for the labor exploitation amounted about 90%, but for the first time for few last years, the women's share dominates among those who apply to our help. The majority of the victims are the young people between 18 and 35 years of age. There are different groups of the population most vulnerable to social and economic turbulences or shocks. The human trafficking and the exploitation of vulnerable people and the growing threat under the situation of the economic crisis and warfare conflict in Ukraine. The severe status of many Ukrainians, in particular IDPs, makes them more, more vulnerable to take the very risky proposals to work abroad, to which they will actually reject under other circumstances. That's why today, as never before, we have to consolidate and pool our efforts in order to prevent human trafficking and provide necessary and timely assistance to those who suffered. Taking into consideration the modern tendencies, we expect that the number of those people in Ukraine, unfortunately, may within the next year skyrocket. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite Inna Volosevych, and after our last speaker, we'll have questions and answers. session. Good morning, dear colleagues. Briefly, I'll introduce my results of the study of labor migration and human trafficking, and that is JFK Ukraine, ordered by the International Organization for Migration that does since 2006, every 3 years. So this is the fourth wave of studies. In 2015, the study in Ukraine, the survey in Ukraine, we had the sample was 2,000 people. That's a representative population of Ukraine, older than 15 years old. That's a study is done every 4 years in Ukraine and Moldova, but now I'll introduce results for Ukraine. So, field study was in July-March 2015. We moved to the results of the survey, of the poll, and let's start with the size of labor migration. So, in 2006, consultants of International Organization of Migration developed a methodology to assess the number of labor migrants in 3 countries. That methodology is based on that every interview we ask if their relatives, including their parents and sisters, fathers, brothers, and everybody else, husband and wife, whether during the poll interview, whether they work abroad, and a part of Ukrainians who told that their relatives are working abroad since 2011 has not changed. 5% of Ukrainians are told that their relatives are working abroad, and the number of labor migrants is 500,000 people. That number has not changed since 2011. At the same time, we observe a negative trend that a number of labor migrants that are working abroad unofficially went up from 20% in 2011 to 41% in 2015. If respondents told that their relatives are working abroad, everyone, sometimes several of them, we asked if they are working abroad officially or unofficially. So the number of Ukrainians who during a poll work abroad unofficially it's about 200,000. Now from facts to assessment and attitude to labor migration. If in 2011 6% of Ukrainians were planning to find job abroad, in 2015 we have 8% of such. That's quite a big change statistically. So despite the fact that the size of migration has not changed since 2011, but in the near future, as we see, we can expect the growth of labor migrants because of economic crisis in the country. Potential migrants as Ukrainians who told that they potentially are interested to find a job abroad. We asked which countries are the most attractive to them to find a job. In 2015, leaders Russia and Poland. So attractiveness of Poland went up by two times since 2011, and also the attractiveness of Russian Federation reduced from 18 to 12%. From migration, we moved to human trafficking issue, and during this poll, we found a group of people that is most vulnerable or inclined to human trafficking, who ready to accept risky proposals to find a job abroad. We had 35 such proposals. Those unofficial job, illegal crossing over the border, also work for illegal enterprises, and also readiness to give the passport to employers during the time of working. And if people agreed at least to one of those proposals, then we include them to vulnerable groups for human trafficking, because understand that's when they risk to become the victim of human trafficking the most. And also we see a negative trend. If in 2011 14% of the people ready to accept risky proposals as to job, and in 2015 we had 21% of such people. And also during that study we assessed the spread of human trafficking using the prevalence of human trafficking. We asked Ukrainians, or if their relatives and categories that I named, that during during the last 3 years whether they got into situations of human trafficking when going abroad to work or for marriage. So only 0.7% of Ukrainians told that they themselves or their close relatives suffered because of human trafficking when they were living abroad for job. And the number of victims of human trafficking in 3 years is 40,000 people. It's a base. The base for such assessment is quite small. This way, an error of this poll is quite big. It's at 5,000, 20,000. So the range of the number of victims of human trafficking during the last 3 years could be from 20 to 60,000 people. The most often Ukrainians got into situations of forced labor when they went abroad. So the situation was like people moved abroad to a job, went abroad for a job, and they forced that person to work free of charge. Sexual exploitation situations. We have twice less abroad. A general trend is that there are more opportunities for legal job of labor migrants abroad. The less is the number of unofficially working migrants, and the less is the number of victims of human trafficking. And the trend is supported by the poll which was done in Moldova. So during 4 waves of the poll interviews after Moldova received a no-visa regime with EU countries, and the first time the number of unofficially working migrants reduced in Moldova, and first time we see in Moldova positive results. We hope that for Ukraine, economic crisis will not bring to a growth of unofficially working migrants and the number of human trafficking. Thank you for attention.
And thank you very much. The floor is given to Natalia Fedorovych, representative of the Social Policy Ministry of Ukraine. Good morning. Combating the human trafficking and protection of Ukrainian labor migrants is the top priority of the activities of the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine in order to combat this kind of human trafficking. Today we already adopted the basic law combating the human trafficking. There is also a national program, and today we are working on the approval of the concept of a new public program to the period till 2020. Also, we already approved the procedure for establishing status of persons who suffered from human trafficking. We determined the mechanism of cooperation between the public agencies regarding the persons who suffered from human trafficking. We already established mechanism for the payment and given the pecuniary assistance to those who suffered, and given the status to those persons who became the victims of human trafficking. As of today, we have a number of problems. In particular, our steps and our strivings and attempts to increase to maximum extent the number of those people who were given the status of the person suffered from human trafficking. There are a lot of difficulties, and I have to explain here that in our legislation there are two notions. A suffered person is social status, the status in which we can establish in response to the application person doesn't depend on the status of the victim, which exists within the cases opened by the Minister of Interior as the response to some kind of crime revealed. The matter is that the citizens of Ukraine who fall victims to human trafficking, they are reluctant to give this information, especially in those regions of Ukraine where there is a rather high level of migration to foreign countries in order to find jobs. And one of the reasons why they do not want to apply for the status, they fear that when they will try to cross next time to cross the border, they will have some difficulties because their status will be, let's say, announced in any kind of the public agency or body. Also, I'd like to say that today in our ministry, together with the executive authorities, both the national and regional public organizations, international organizations, we have established the working group consisting of the specialists and experts, which works on the one hand to develop the proposals to further improve the legislation on combating fighting the human trafficking, also the development of the maximum high quality program, and of course the issue of implementation of the visa-free regime is very important to us because this also includes some issues which are monitored by the European Union. That's why, in addition to the wish and the duty on part of the state to preserve their citizens from getting into the nets of human trafficking, very important to us is the external assessment. And the other day, there was the official report of the State Department of the United States with the assessment of combating human trafficking in different countries of the world. The positive thing is that we remained in the second control group, so our country was not transferred to the third group. To the countries, they actually apply sanctions against those sanctions, which are included in the list of the third group. But we have the very strict and severe assessment of the situation, and there were some recommendations that Ukraine must make a number of the steps in the future to improve the situation in order to better find human trafficking. And also would like to emphasize that the Minister of Social Policy, together with our other colleagues from the LAM and other public organization experts, we prepared the draft law in order to implement the special directive EU, which will contain a very big module actually targeted to combat the human trafficking. Should you have any questions, I'll be happy to take those. Thank you very much. We are ready for questions or clarification, should there be any among the journalists. If not, thanks a lot for this very exhaustive presentation. We'll be happy to see again the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center with the news about combating human trafficking. Thank you very much again. Our briefing is over.